Today we're going to explore a fascinating paradox in creativity and learning, the imitation-to-originality paradox. This is the counterintuitive finding that original creators almost always begin by copying others. Here's the central question: how can copying lead to originality? Isn't imitation the opposite of creativity? The answer lies in understanding how the brain learns and represents complex patterns. Let me explain the neuroscience behind this. The first stage is pattern recognition through imitation. When you copy something, your brain is not just mechanically reproducing it. When you see a painting style or hear a musical phrase, sensory information flows through your visual or auditory cortex. These neural pathways begin encoding the statistical regularities of what you're observing. Your brain automatically extracts features. For visual art, this might be edges, color palettes, brushstroke patterns. For music, it's rhythms, chord progressions, melodic contours. Here's the key insight. Imitation forces deep encoding. When you try to reproduce something, you must pay attention to details you would miss as a passive observer. Let me explain the neuroscience more precisely. Your brain uses something called predictive coding. The error signal equals what you observe minus what your internal model predicted. This error drives learning. When you first try to imitate something, your internal model is weak. Your predictions are terrible. The error signal is huge. A beginner has massive error signals shown by these large deviation arrows. An expert has refined their internal model so the errors are tiny. Each time you attempt to imitate, the error signal updates your internal model. Synaptic weights adjust. Neural representations sharpen. Let me show you the mathematics that governs this learning process. The change in synaptic weight equals the learning rate ETA times the error signal times the input activity. This is a simplified version of Hebbian learning. After many repetitions, maybe hundreds or thousands of practice attempts, your internal model converges. It now accurately represents the style you've been imitating. Stage 2 is internal representation formation. This is where something magical happens in your brain. You now have a compressed mental model of the style. This isn't just memorization. It's a generative model that captures the underlying principles. Your brain stores both explicit rules that you can verbalize and implicit patterns that you feel but cannot easily describe. The implicit knowledge is often more powerful. Once your model is strong, you can predict what should come next in that style. If I show you half a Picasso painting, you could guess reasonable completions. Let me introduce a mathematical concept, style space. Think of every possible artistic style as existing in a high-dimensional space. A style vector S is defined by features F1 through Fn. For visual art, n might be hundreds of dimensions: color saturation, line thickness, symmetry, complexity, and so on. Each master artist or musician occupies a distinct region in this high-dimensional style space. Monet is over here, Picasso is over there, Bach is in a completely different region. When you imitate someone, you're learning the coordinates of their region in style space. You're mapping their territory. Stage 3 is where mutation and innovation emerge. This is the most fascinating part of the paradox. Once you have the internal map, once you understand the territory, you can explore nearby regions that nobody has visited yet. You can interpolate between styles you've learned. If you've mastered Impressionism and Cubism, you can explore the space between them. This is how new styles emerge. Your brain naturally introduces variation. Neural noise, random fluctuations and activation patterns cause your reproductions to drift slightly from the original. Creative mutation is controlled randomness. It's not completely random chaos. It's random exploration guided by your internalized constraints. Let me give you the mathematics of how innovation emerges from imitation. Your new style vector equals the master style vector plus epsilon times a random perturbation vector r. Epsilon controls how far you deviate. When epsilon approaches 0, you get pure imitation. You're just copying. When epsilon goes to infinity, you get random noise with no structure. This is not creativity, it's just chaos. At some optimal epsilon value, you get innovation, enough variation to be novel, but constrained enough by your learned model to maintain coherence. Now let me explain why you cannot skip the imitation stage. This is crucial to understanding the paradox. You cannot innovate in a space you do not represent internally. If you have no model of what music is, no internal structure for musical patterns, any sounds you make will be random noise. Here's an analogy. Think about learning a language. You start by imitating sounds, copying phrases, memorizing grammar. Only after extensive imitation can you generate novel sentences that you've never heard before but that are grammatically correct and meaningful. The same principle applies to any creative domain: art, music, science, mathematics, writing. You must first internalize the structure through imitation. Let me give you some quantitative estimates of how long the imitation phase typically lasts. Malcolm Gladwell popularized the 10,000-hour rule. This is roughly how long it takes to achieve mastery in a domain. 10,000 hours equals about 5 years of full-time practice at 40 hours per week. This is a reasonable estimate for building a strong internal model. Neuroscience research shows that most creative breakthroughs happen after this threshold. Before you've put in the hours, you simply don't have the internal machinery for innovation. Let me give you a concrete example. Pablo Picasso. Many people think Picasso just painted weird abstract stuff from the beginning. But look at Picasso's early work. At age 15, he was creating photorealistic academic paintings that would impress any classical master. He spent years mastering realistic representation. Only after building that internal model did he have the foundation to deconstruct it and create cubism. Picasso himself said, "Learn the rules like a professional so you can break them like an artist." This perfectly captures the imitation-to-originality paradox. Let me give you a modern analogy from artificial intelligence that makes this even clearer. Training a neural network requires 2 phases. First, supervised learning on examples. Second, fine-tuning or transfer learning for new tasks. Phase 1 minimizes the sum of squared errors between predictions and true labels. This is pure imitation. The network is learning to copy the training data patterns. Phase 2 uses the learned features for new tasks. The network now has an internal representation it can adapt and recombine. You cannot skip phase 1 and expect creativity. A randomly initialized neural network produces garbage. Only after learning structure can it generate coherent novel outputs. This is exactly how human brains work. We are biological neural networks. The same learning principles apply. There's a deeper concept here from statistics called the variance-bias trade-off, and it applies to creativity too. Total error equals bias squared plus variance. Bias is systematic error from your model being too simple. Variance is error from being too sensitive to random fluctuations. Pure imitation gives you high bias and low variance. You're stuck in one style, but you're consistent. Random experimentation, with no foundation, gives you low bias but extremely high variance. Every output is different, but most are incoherent garbage. Optimal creativity sits at the sweet spot. You have enough structure from imitation to avoid high variance, but enough flexibility to avoid high bias. Let me discuss the practical implications of this paradox for learning and creativity. Implication 1. Embrace copying in the beginning. Don't feel guilty about imitating masters. It's not cheating, it's necessary. Implication 2. Copy multiple masters, not just one. If you only imitate one person, you'll just be their clone. Learn from many sources to create a richer internal model. Your unique style emerges from the intersection of multiple influences. 4 different masters blend into something new that is distinctly yours. Implication 3. Trust the process. There will be a long period where you feel like you're just copying and not being original. That's normal and necessary. Implication 4. Originality emerges spontaneously. You don't force it. Once your internal model is strong enough, variations will naturally arise. Here's a critical question. How do you know when you're ready to stop imitating and start innovating? The answer is, you cannot consciously decide this. It's not a binary switch you flip. Innovation gradually emerges as your imitation becomes more fluid. There are signs you're transitioning from imitation to innovation. Let me list them. Sign 1. You can reproduce the style without looking at references. Your internal model is strong enough to generate from memory. Sign 2. You notice yourself making small, spontaneous changes that feel right. Your brain is starting to mutate the patterns. Sign 3. You can explain why something does or does not fit the style. You've extracted the implicit rules. Sign 4. You feel constrained by pure imitation. You have ideas that go beyond copying. This restlessness is a good sign. Let me now resolve the paradox explicitly. How can imitation lead to originality when they seem like opposites? The resolution is this. Originality requires a representation space to explore. Imitation builds that space in your brain. Without it, you have nowhere to innovate. Creativity is a function of structure and variation. Structure comes from imitation. Variation comes from neural noise and recombination. You need both. Imitation and originality are not opposites. They are sequential stages of the same learning process. Think of it as a continuum. You move gradually from pure imitation through a transition zone into genuine innovation. The boundaries are fuzzy. Let me end with some final thoughts and questions to consider. Question: can you be too original too early? Yes. If you try to innovate before building internal structure, you produce incoherent noise that looks like creativity but has no depth. Question: is some imitation better than others? Yes. Active imitation, where you try to understand why something works, is far superior to passive copying. Question: do all domains follow this pattern? Yes. Music, art, writing, science, mathematics, sports, all follow the same imitation-to-originality progression. This is a universal learning pattern because it reflects fundamental principles of how brains learn complex structured domains. Your brain is a pattern matching and generation machine. It needs examples to learn patterns. It needs patterns to generate variations. Even biological evolution follows this pattern. Mutation without selection is chaos. Selection without mutation is stagnation. You need both. Evolution equals replication plus mutation plus selection. Replication is like imitation. Mutation is like variation. Selection is the environment choosing what works. Cultural evolution works the same way. Ideas replicate through imitation. Mutations create variations. Social selection determines what survives. Let me summarize the key points we've covered today. Point 1. Imitation builds the internal representations necessary for creativity. This is not optional. Point 2. You cannot innovate in a space you do not internally represent. Random experimentation without foundation produces noise. Point 3. Originality emerges spontaneously once your internal model is strong enough. You don't force it. Point 4. Copy multiple masters, not just one. This creates a richer internal representation space for innovation. Point 5. The imitation phase typically requires thousands of hours. Be patient with the process. Let me end with practical advice if you're trying to develop creativity in any domain. Step 1. Choose your masters deliberately. Pick people whose style resonates with you and whose work you want to understand deeply. Step 2. Practice active imitation. Don't just copy mechanically. Try to understand why they made each choice. Step 3. Study multiple influences in parallel. This accelerates the development of your unique voice. Step 4. Be patient with the imitation phase. Thousands of hours of feeling derivative is normal and necessary. Step 5. Notice when variations spontaneously emerge. Don't force originality, but do pay attention when your brain starts naturally deviating. Step 6. Gradually increase your variation parameter. As your foundation strengthens, allow yourself more freedom to experiment. The imitation-to-originality paradox is resolved when you understand that they are not opposites, but sequential stages of skill development. Copying is how the brain learns structure. Structure is the foundation for coherent variation. Variation constrained by structure is creativity. This is not a bug in human learning. It is a feature. It is how all complex skill acquisition works at the neural level. Remember, every master was once an imitator. Every innovator built their foundation through copying. There are no shortcuts to originality.